It's time to re-enter the gladiatorial pits with the Spire Tyrants. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you all doing today? I am running out of Chaos Bespokes to talk about, and I am actually going through some of the older ones I did a year or so back and updating them with a refreshed look and, well, with their battle traits. And Spire Tyrants is one of the last I can actually touch up on. And like last time, I'm pretty darn excited to talk about the Spire Tyrants because they are one of the better ones. Now that might sound a little bit unusual because you don't really see Spire Tyrants played all that much, but in terms of like bespoke power, these Spire Tyrants do have a surprising amount going for them, and today that's what we're going to talk about. So let's dive in, and yes, this is a Santa hat. Apparently, because it's December, I've been required by Mrs. Toast to wear a Santa hat in all my videos now going forward. So you have to put up with that. Also, cue snow and cue Christmas music. Badoosh. Before I get into all that though, please be sure to like, subscribe and drop a comment down below, as well as potentially join my Patreon like all these wonderful people on screen now. Badoosh, as all of this helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon, and by extension helps support the channel. You can also help support the channel by going to Element Games Badoosh using my affiliate link. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
And we're back, and yes, I am getting rid of the snow now. Badoosh and that music. Badoosh. We are very serious, but the hat has to stay on fear of death. We are going to start with their battle trait, and it is called Entertain Me. Once per battle round, a friendly fighter with this battle trait within 1 inch of one or more enemy fighters can pick one of those enemy fighters to duel. When they do so, each time that friendly fighter makes an attack action that targets that enemy fighter, you can change the strength characteristic of your attack action to equal the toughness characteristic of that enemy fighter. So Entertain Me is kind of weird. Being able to hit basically anything on a 4+ with anything once per battle round is kind of funky. I do kind of like that when going into stronger things, but that's really it, right? It's you're just hitting on a 4+. It's kind of like having a free poison attack with Splintered Fang, but slightly worse. It's kind of good, right? It's okay. It's a decent, free-to-use thing that costs you all of your allies, monsters, thralls, and also Bladeborn to use. But the trade-off's okay. Like, Spire Tyrants are pretty darn good in combat. They've got some pretty good damage numbers on them, and Entertain Me can help them sort of like swing up and do some like cheeky cheating stuff where they're hitting things that they really shouldn't be hitting kind of reliably. And the fact that they can do this every battle round for free, it's kind of okay. I like Entertain Me. It fits that gladiatorial theme of the Spire Tyrants very nice. It also means I can do this.
Are you not entertained?
Going onto their reaction, we have gladiatorial display, and this one is one of my favorite kinds of reactions because it's a proper cheeky little gamble that works really well in certain situations, right? So a fighter can make this reaction after they are targeted by a melee attack action, but before the hit rolls are made. If none of the hit rolls from that attack action result in a critical hit, allocate 4 damage points to the attacking fighter. This is fantastic at punishing things with low numbers of attacks. We're thinking like spears, right? 2 attack spears, things like Vex Small, right? Things that are just got really low output of attacks. You're less likely to crit. Simply put, right? If you're less likely to crit, you're more likely to take the 4 damage. This is statistically better than counter when you are being attacked by basically anything with 2 attacks. And it gets a bit iffier at 3 attacks, and it gets iffier the more attacks they have. But as a general rule, if they've got 2 attacks or 3 attacks, I am using gladiatorial display over counter because it's way more fun, and the payoff, whilst a bit gambly, tends to be more impactful. 4 damage is a big old chunk to take, and I am all for that. So gladiatorial display, for me, is just a big win. I really, really enjoy it. It's not the best counter plus reaction. It does have its sort of like restrictions, and it does get worse the more attacks they actually have, which is like the opposite of counter. But again, in the right scenario, it really is just counter, but better. Going on to their generic abilities, these are abilities that everybody can use, and they only have one, which is fairly unusual. It's called Pit Fighters, and it's a double. A fighter can use this ability only if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack action made by them this activation. This fighter can make a bonus move or a bonus attack action. this is your standard chaos ability. What makes this different is that most of these abilities, right, in order, in death, in destruction, and partially in chaos, are that they're usually tied to hero rune marks that only heroes get to do the special move or attack again thing. Khorne is the exception. All Khorne things have Blood for the Blood God, which is exactly this. But Spire Tyrants have Pit Fighter, which is that, right? And this gives the Spire Tyrants a lot of momentum on the battlefield. Everyone can cheat in extra actions if you gamble on doing a kill. And that's easier said than done, but it's not necessarily as hard as some people might make out. And why this doesn't work quite so well, say with like Claws of Karanak or a lot of Khorne stuff, is that a lot of Khorne stuff, like Khorne Demons, tend to have pretty bad damage output, and the Spire Tyrants do have some things that really benefit from having just big, chunky, meaty hits, and then they can pull off this Pit Fighter and get crazy amounts of value. So I actually like Pit Fighter a lot within the context of Spire Tyrants. I'm not as much of a fan of this in other warbands, but in Spire Tyrants, I find myself using this a lot, especially if I'm throwing dice into something that's already injured. If they're full health, I'm less likely to use Pit Fighters. But if they're already injured, then my gut reaction is just to pop a Pit Fighter and go to town, get the action bonuses, and start really maximizing the momentum plays of the Spire Tyrants. When everyone can do this, you can really start opening up the battlefield in interesting ways and finding plays you might have otherwise missed, but you do have to start looking for them. But remember, it is a gamble. You might not get the kill, and Onslaught might have been better as a result. So use wisely. So like I said, that's all the generic abilities. There's only one. So now we go into their units, and we'll go over the specific abilities as we hit them up, and we start with the Pit Champion. And the Pit Champion is actually one of my favorites in Chaos Bespokes because the guy just has everything you kind of want, right? This guy's 170 points, movement 4, toughness 4, and 22 wounds, and that 22 wounds is a big deal. He'll be taking 1 to 2 hits more before dying. He's more likely to dodge being one-shot by things like Vexmores and Gutlords and the big smashers in WARCRY right now. That 22 wounds might not seem like a lot, but it really is a big deal on this guy. And for 170 points, this is a fairly solid bespoke defensive stat line. Offensively is also pretty darn good. A 4.525 offensive profile at 1 inch and a 4.414 at 3 inches gives this guy a surprising amount of reach. Sure, the 1.4 damage is a little bit noodly, but 4 attacks is fine, and range 3 is just a nice thing to have in your profile, especially when he's not really paying all that much for it. The guy's only 170 points. This is like the standard for your Chaos Bespoke leaders. And this guy's packing advantages. He's packing more wounds. He's packing a better than average bespoke melee 1-inch range attack profile, right? This guy's surprisingly good for his points when it comes to bespoke leaders. And of course, he has access to Pit Fighters for momentum-based stuff and his own triple called Champion of the War Pits, which is basically a 6-inch aura of +1 attack once he lands a kill, which I am so very rarely a fan of these, and I am not a fan here either. If you see an opportunity to pop this, then go right for it, right? But if you want a +1 attack aura, you can get this without the kill requirement in so many ways through allies. Like, take some Skaven stuff. Take a War Queen, right? They all do this without having to invest yourself in gambling for a kill. Do that instead. This is honestly the biggest downside of the Pit Champion, is that his ability, his unique ability, is just kind of naff. But he does always have Pit Fight to fall back on. He does, of course, get to use your battle trait if that's available. So the guy's pretty darn good. To really make this guy sing, though, spending some points and increasing his attack output or his damage output is really solid. I'm typically a fan of putting +1 attack on his 1-inch melee profile, but also +1 damage works wonders too for the same cost, as does putting +1 damage on the flail, giving him a 4.424 flail attack, really rounding out his offensive options on the battlefield. Unlike the best of the best bespoke leaders in WARCRY, I wouldn't take 2 Pit Champions. They are absolutely solid as a one-off. They're definitely not a tax. These guys have value on the battlefield, but I wouldn't take more than 1. And that's largely because we have access to some pretty funky things in the form of the Bestigor Destroyer. And the Bestigor Destroyer is basically why the Spire Tyrants work as a mid-range. One of the reasons mid-range doesn't really work in WARCRY most of the time is because your guys are too squishy to survive things that are more damaging, more elite things, and they don't have the damage output to massively deal with the horde output from horde warbands, and they just tend to struggle in both of those scenarios. Bestigor destroyers do not suffer from any of those problems. Bestigor destroyers are really great. For 145 points, movement 4, toughness 4, and 18 wounds. 18 wounds is a big deal. Like 22 wounds, 18 wounds dodges a lot of things. It dodges 4-8 profiles really nicely. It dodges 5-10 profiles really nicely. This defensive profile is absolutely wonderful. Then onto its offensive profile, 3-5-3-6 at 1-inch range is also really, really nice. This guy can put a hole in just about anything. Throw in pit fighters. This guy's landing the kills, and then he's moving on to do more things. He's landing a kill, then killing something else, and then maybe killing something else all in one turn. He's a bit of a beater, a bit of a brawler, and he works so well in that because he has 18 wounds. He's not too expensive, and his damage is great. I absolutely love the Bestigor Destroyer. He's one of the better mid-range options in the game, right? He is such a solid piece on the board and a genuine threat at all times. He's a little bit slow. You might notice that movement 4. As a Beastman, every other Beastman in the game is movement 5. This guy is packing the armor, right? This guy's packing a bunch of armor, and he's a big old burly bloke. This guy's slowed down by that, unfortunately. But still, movement 4 is the average. This guy's really solid, and he comes with a unique quad. And the quad is really fun. It is Brutal Strike. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter and roll a dice. On a 2+, allocate 8 damage points to that fighter. Why is this good? A few reasons. The average damage you're going to do when swinging with your Bestigor Destroyer with 1 attack action is like 7 damage. Now, you can't roll a 7 damage with a Bestigor. He's got a 3-6 profile. That's impossible. So you're actually looking at somewhere between 6 and 9, with the average probably lower to that 6. Let's put Rampage into this equation. You get to move, and then you get to attack, and that attack is going to do about 6 damage, and then you can do whatever you want after that. And that is fine. If you aren't already in combat, frankly, that's fine. If you can get into combat and then swing 3 times with like 9 dice overall, that's amazing. Do that instead. If you're already in combat, then Brutal Strike is probably going to be your better bet against basically everything, because you aren't doing that average of 6. You're not relying on your strength being better than their toughness to do your damage. You are doing a flat 8 damage on a 2+ against everything. And that's pretty darn solid, especially when you're throwing up the rest of your dice to do even more damage. Brutal Strike is great in a number of scenarios. Hitting on a 2+ is nice and reliable. Flat 8 damage means you're slamming a lot of chaff and just killing them outright. It's just a really solid quad. It's a lot of fun. Sure, you might do more damage with that Rampage. You might roll 3 6s on your Rampage attack and then do 18 damage. That is always a potential. But for straight up reliability, right? Hitting on a 2+ for 8 damage is really solid. And I find myself using Brutal Strike all of the time. It's a really fun, very effective quad. And the more you use it, the more you'll start to recognize the situations where it really shines, and you can start gaining massive amounts of value from it. Yes, Rampage is better in some scenarios, but Brutal Strike has its place too, and it's a lot of fun to use. Continuing with Brutal Strike, we also have the Headclaimer. And the Headclaimer also gets Brutal Strike, so I won't go into that again. The Headclaimer is 135 points, so 10 points cheaper than the Bestigor Destroyer, has a movement 4, toughness 4, and 15 wound profile with a 4-5-2-5 at 1-inch range. This guy is actually pretty good too. On average, their damage is the same as the Bestigor Destroyer. So in terms of raw damage output, they are functionally the same. The main reason I don't take the Headclaimer and I take the Bestigor Destroyer is because the Headclaimer only has 15 wounds. The Bestigor Destroyer for 10 points gets 3 extra wounds, and that's pretty good value, honestly. The Bestigor Destroyer survives longer. He can get more damage out by virtue of being less dead, and he dodges, like I said, a bunch of common profiles for instant deathing. And the Headclaimer falls into a whole bunch of them by having a few less wounds. So for me, I do tend to just take a bunch of Bestigor Destroyers and avoid the Headclaimer entirely. However, the model is really cool, and I sometimes take him because I like his helmet. It really is that simple. Going on to Pit Veterans, we have two variants, Pit Veterans with dual weapons and Pit Veterans with shield. And they're both pretty good. Honestly, they're both kind of fine. The dual weapon variant is movement 4, toughness 4, 12 wounds for 105 points with a 4-4-2-4 profile. And the shield variant is movement 4, toughness 5, 12 wounds for 100 points. And it's a 3-4-2-4 profile. So one's more aggressive, one's more defensive, and their points are more or less the same. For me, I like the Pit Veteran with shield. 3-4-2-4 is an absolutely average profile at 100 points. This is a totally fine profile. Toughness 5 is really nice, and 12 wounds at this points level is absolutely fine. The Pit Veteran with shield is just a nice lad to have. He's not too expensive, he's nice and durable. He's okay in combat. I like him a lot. In terms of abilities, they both have a triple called Readied Stance, and until the end of the battle round, add half of the value of this ability rounding up to the toughness characteristic of this fighter. And it has uses. Gaining toughness is fine. You can use this to stay alive against really high value range attacks. You can use this to sort of like push things more in your favor when you're being attacked by really strong things. But honestly, for a triple, it's not all that great. You can use it in like clutch scenarios to try and stay alive, but I am not a massive fan of Ready Stance, honestly. The Pit Veteran with shield gets another ability though called Shield Ram, which is a double. Until the end of this fighter's activation, the next time this fighter finishes a move action within 1 inch of an enemy fighter, pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter and roll a dice. On a 2 to a 5, allocate 2 damage points. On a 6, do dice value damage. I really like Shield Ram. It's one of the better versions of your move and then do damage on a double thing. We've seen this recently on Chaos Legionnaires, and I didn't like that version because it wasn't as good as this version. It's more reliable at doing damage than Onslaught would be if you're moving in, and it has the added benefit of letting you run 8 inches and then slam something for 2 damage and doing like that last bit of damage to take them out, or trying to do that Hail Mary play of trying to do that big old chunk of 6 damage on that crit roll, right? Shield Ram is great, and it's the final nail in the coffin for the dual wield weapon Pit Veterans, because they can't use this. It's only the shield guy. So when the shield guy is cheaper, he's harder to shift, he's still good in combat, and he has a better ability. Shields all the way. Going on to our final mid-rangey guy, we have the Frenzied Rager, and this lad's not bad. Okay, for 95 points, movement 3, toughness 4, 15 wounds, 4 attacks, strength 4, 2-4 damage. Guy's really solid, right? Can't deny it. This guy's just really solid. He's a little bit slow, and Spire Tyrants have no built-in movement shenanigans to get him across the board. So he is very slow, but 15 wounds is really nice. At 95 points, 15 wounds is like one of the highest wounds you can get at this points level. It's really solid. And 4 attacks, strength 4, 2-4 damage is a fantastic profile. Again, at 95 points, a 4-4-2-4 profile. That's pretty darn good. The Frenzied Rager is really, really solid, but he is held back heavily by movement 3. This guy could spend the whole game running across the board and doing nothing. He is way too slow, and I struggle to justify his inclusion as a result. If you do take a lot of Frenzied Ragers, you'll want to find some way of getting him around the board easier. So something like a Sloppy Bile Piper to give him +1 move, or even just bless him with +1 move. But at that point, you really are starting to eat away at his points efficiency. So not the best idea. This guy's a fantastic model in a vacuum, but in reality, he really struggles to utilize his fantastic stats. And if you're going for something like this, I would, again, rather just take the Pit Veteran with Shield, despite being worse in almost every single stat. And finally, we have our chaff, and these are the Pit Fighters, and we have a Punch Dagger, a Spear, and a Net, and they are identical defensively. Movement 4, toughness 3, 10 wounds, they're all 65 points. Now the Dagger is a 4-3-1-4, the Spear is a 3-3-1-4 but has a 2-inch range, and the Net is a 4-3-1-3 but has access to a net. Because they're all the same points and they're all kind of the same in combat and they're all the same durability and stat-wise defensively, you only ever take the Net. It's that simple, right? For 65 points, 10 wounds, a net, and a pretty darn solid chaff offensive profile, there's no reason to take anything else. When you're looking to pad your numbers, when you're looking to take chaff, you will take Net Pit Fighters. He massively overshadows everybody else. These are not even worth taking. They have no unique abilities. This guy has a net. I'll put it on screen now. Badoosh. It is literally just the most generic, basic net. This guy just like kind of like fills a bunch of roles. Like, firstly, he's your main support character. Secondly, he is your chaff. Thirdly, he's actually really good at fighting other chaff. So he just kind of, he fills a lot of roles, and you will love him as a result. And that's the Spire Tyrants lineup, and they're a little bit bland, right? They're interesting. They've got some really fun profiles. Their abilities are really straightforward. They're somewhat bland to look at, but on the battlefield, they do feel really interesting to play. And it really does, for me, come down to Pit Fighter. Pit Fighter and their profiles really elevate the Spire Tyrants into something that's really fun on the battlefield. They've got a lot of momentum. Once they start going, they just keep on going. They start grinding out value from their kills, and this leads to more kills, which leads to more value, and it's a cycle of just grinding through things really effectively. And because their battle trait is okay, but of course completely skippable, you are totally fine in taking allies and not losing out too much. But because their core lineup is so strong, and their battle trait is okay, you can absolutely stay completely in faction and do work with the Spire Tyrants. As per usual, when it comes to Chaos Warbands, I'm not going to go into the allies all that much. Chaos allies are in a bit of a space now where the most optimal allies are just seen everywhere. And yes, Spire Tyrants having fairly cheap chaff can absolutely take one or two big smashy allies and do work with that. Of course, Varangard, Fomroids, Vexmore, you know the drill now. You can take those in these lists and they're totally fine. So I'm not going to focus on the allies all that much in this video. I will, however, throw a list on screen now, Badoosh. And this is an all-in faction list that I have run a few times, and it just does work. You have a pit champion, 3 Bestigor destroyers, 2 pit veterans with shields, and 3 pit fighters with nets. This is a 9-man warband, so you've got a fairly sizable force. You've got 3 big heavy beaters with 3 Bestigor destroyers. You've got that pit champion who's also good at blending through things. You've got 2 burly pit veterans who are toughness 5. They can take the hits, they can shield bash, they're decent in combat. Solid guys. And then finally you have those 3 nets. 1 net in every deployment zone, ready to go out and deal with anything you don't want to deal with. When deploying your guys, there is no thought in your deployments. You put 1 Bestigor destroyer and 1 net in every deployment group, and you spread your pit champion and your pit veterans as required, and then you're good to go. This list is super fun to play. Its game plan is really straightforward. It can smash stuff, it can tank stuff, it can net stuff. It's a fun time. Check the list out and let me know down below what you thought of it. Now, if you've been watching Road to Gold, you'll know that I am all in on F-Lim at the minute, and F-Lim works wonders with the Spire Tyrants because he adds a whole bunch of mobility and support that otherwise the Spire Tyrants completely lack. He also adds range, again, the Spire Tyrants completely lack. You can take a pit champion, F-Lim the Unknowable, 2 Bestigor destroyers, a spawn maw, Apotrax the Starfish, 2 pit fighters with nets, and a Kindle Finger, and this is 965 points for 9 models. How you bless this warband is you slap +1 strength on F-Lim on his range attack to take him strength 5, and then you bless your Bestigor destroyers with +1 crit, making them much more reliable at killing 10 wound models, which is a pretty big deal. This list more or less retains everything the last list had. You do lose a little bit of durability because you don't have those pit veterans on the board, and you do lose a Bestigor destroyer. However, in return, you get access to pulls, you get access to 4 sources of teleportation, you have access to revives, you have access to AoE explosions and ranged attacks and ranged 2 melee attacks, and you now have a usable triple. I mean, what's not to like? Do bear in mind that this list is far more complex to actually play. The first list is super simple, super straightforward, and very effective. This list is arguably more powerful. There is a lot more going on. Once you start putting in F-Lim and things start going a little bit crazy. So bear that in mind, there will be a bit of a learning curve when you're trying to wrangle the pandemonium to your will. And that's the Spire Tyrants. These guys are so much fun to play. They're fairly straightforward. They are perfect for a new player to get into the game because they're just durable enough, they're just fast enough, they're just killy enough, and they have just enough support to teach you the core fundamentals of WARCRY whilst being strong enough to actually compete in a proper competitive scene. These guys are one of the best bespoke warbands in Chaos and just one of the best warbands in WARCRY in general. I'm a huge fan of them, and let me know down below what you think of the Spire Tyrants, and of course hit that like button and subscribe. And until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Hey all, and welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shouts out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Maps, Sable Saber, Steph, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for supporting the channel, and I will catch you all next time. Ta-ra.